I feel like I'm living in a dream, like I'm in a nightmare. It's the worst crisis of my life.
A bombshell break in the case of an American missing overseas. Months after Ana Knezevich disappeared in Spain, her estranged husband is arrested in Miami.
It's going to take some time for them to basically retrace everything that happened and see what kind of evidence would be proof to prove someone's guilt.
So what's ahead for the investigation?
That always becomes an interesting aspect of any criminal case where they're alleging a murder, yet they haven't recovered the body.
And what are those closest to Ana saying now?
That we miss her and that we love her.
This is a story Law&Crime has been following since February, when 40-year-old Ana Knezevich was last seen on February 2nd. Ana is originally from Colombia, but is an American citizen who was based in Florida. At the time of her disappearance, she was renting out an apartment in Madrid, Spain, while in the midst of a tumultuous divorce. Ana's husband of 13 years is David Knezevich, who we'll get to shortly. But before we ever heard David's name, we heard Ana's, when her best friend sounded the alarm that something was off.
She wouldn't meet a man in the street and say that she's gonna go away for a few days. Like that's not Ana. That is definitely not my friend.
That's Sana Ramo, who spoke with Law&Crime back in February. She says Ana was last seen by a neighbor at the apartment she was renting in Madrid. Ana spoke to a friend on the phone at about 10 o'clock that night and hasn't been heard from since. The next day, Sana received a series of strange texts from Ana's phone. She shared the messages with Law&Crime. They read in part, quote, "I met someone wonderful. He has a summer house about 2 hours from Madrid. We are going there now and I will spend a few days there. Signal is spotty. I'll call you when I get back."
Logistically, it didn't even make sense because she had those plans to go to Barcelona early Monday morning. So she would not leave Madrid Saturday afternoon and state that she would be away for several days when she has already made plans to go to Barcelona Monday morning. Like that didn't even make sense. So all of these things got me concerned immediately.
And the message itself just didn't sound like Ana.
She doesn't do those things. It was worded very differently than how she writes.
It's the same story from Ana's family. They didn't want to speak on camera, but shared a screenshot of the message with us. Ana's brother told us the message is in Spanish, but says it isn't in the dialect Ana would have used. He says it seems like someone wrote up the message in one language and used Google Translate to convert it to Spanish. All this leads us to February 4th, when a wellness check was performed at Ana's apartment, but there was no sign of her.
She was not in her home, and the door was locked from the outside. No, there were no obvious signs of violence or anything that happened inside of the apartment. But the mission of the fire department was to just check if there was an injured person. They don't do any investigation for more than that, and they just looked and then they left. So
but the mystery continued when investigators announced someone was seen near Ana's apartment the night she went missing, wearing a helmet and spray painting security cameras. All this brings us back to David Knezevich, Ana's estranged husband. When we spoke to Sana in February, she told us she'd been in contact with David after Ana went missing.
Well, I've been in contact with him. I was in contact with him throughout the week, last week. I believe the last time I spoke to him was on Saturday. Police did speak to him in Madrid. I went to Madrid on February 8th. And next day on the 9th, when I went to the police station, they did, I contacted him from there. And the day he called back and they made contact with him to ask about his whereabouts.
And he has no idea where Ana may be?
He says he has no idea. No, he doesn't know where Ana is.
Our next update of Ana's case comes in April, when reports circulated that David refused to take a polygraph test. David is originally from Serbia and was apparently there around the time Ana disappeared. However, he retained a Florida-based attorney after her disappearance. In a statement, David's attorney said he has, quote, spoken to the police a number of times. I have reached out to the FBI and let them know that we are available to aid in any way. He, meaning David, has given police information on credit cards, attempted to hire a lawyer in Spain. Now jump to May 4th when David is arrested at the airport in Miami. He'd just flown in from Belgrade, Serbia. To understand David's arrest and where the case is headed, I sat down with defense attorney Mike Korbanix.
It's a very interesting case. My first thoughts are it's going to be difficult to get all the evidence together because you're talking about two separate countries. And this doesn't have to do about politics or anything of that nature, but it's just the physicality of preparing a defense or a prosecution is interviewing witnesses. How are you going to collect all the information? So and you have to travel all this distance to do it. Although everybody thinks technology cures everything, it really doesn't when you have to look at physical places, prove the case, and put facts together. So it's very difficult in that way. And also, there's going to have to be agreement between the two countries as to who's going to prosecute it.
It was the FBI that made the announcement of David's arrest for, quote, his alleged involvement in the kidnapping of a U.S. citizen in Madrid, Spain, on or about February 2nd, 2024. Authorities confirmed his arrest was made without incident by the Diplomatic Security Service and the FBI at Miami International Airport. And with this news comes more details about the alleged crime. Investigators now say the man who spray painted the cameras near Ana's apartment resembles David, and Spanish authorities even have security video of him buying duct tape and the same brand of paint used to cover up the cameras. They also say David met a different Colombian woman on a dating app and asked her to translate a message similar to the one Sana received. David's attorney has maintained his client is innocent and that David was in Serbia at the time of Ana's disappearance. But the FBI says David rented a car and returned it with almost 5,000 more miles on it and tinted windows. Spanish authorities say they saw a similar vehicle with stolen plates in the area of Ana's disappearance, but couldn't determine who the driver was because of the tinted windows. All this leads up to David's arrest. Mike says it's possible David's attorney knew the arrest was coming, or he could have been blindsided by American authorities at the airport.
It could really be either or, because we don't really know what he was told, but obviously there was some sort of heads up that there was an investigation going on if he had retained counsel, and counsel, from what I understand, was talking before this arrest about the investigation. So I assume they knew sort of where it was coming. And it was just a question of when and where the arrest was going to happen. And it could have been where if the government could have asked that he voluntarily surrender. And, whether or not he chose to or not, I'm not really clear.
Whether he knew it was coming or not, there had to have been enough evidence to justify David's arrest. He was arrested on American soil by American authorities. What sort of evidence would they need to take him into custody here?
Well, they only need enough for probable cause. That's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It's just a little bit more than a little bit. And when I say a little bit, meaning it's got to be more than an accusation. There's got to be some evidence, but it doesn't necessarily have to be enough evidence to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That's what a jury does. So it would take a lot of time. But then again, I understand in some articles they're talking about seeing cameras, having things of that nature. So as you go forward and try to rewrite what had occurred, they may be having now, maybe they have some travel documents. When he said he wasn't in Spain, he was in Spain. I don't know, but that's basically how you have to start from square one and investigate each step next.
What would that look like between Spain and the United States coming to terms with who is going to move forward with any litigation?
Well, first of all, my understanding of the federal statute is that we could prosecute it as long as the people and the victim, the alleged victim, and the accused are both United States citizens. And once that occurs, it still has to go through a process to see if the prosecution in the United States wants to prosecute the case and move forward in that way. So it's a lot of small steps sort of behind the scenes to see who's going to get the jurisdiction to hear the case and then how you're going to proceed.
Here on Law&Crime, I do a lot of stories, unfortunately, about women who are murdered. And a constant theme I see is that the first suspect usually is the significant other, whether it be husband, boyfriend, somebody they were seeing, etc. So why didn't authorities jump to him right away? Why would it have taken so long for his arrest now, months after she went missing?
As you point out, a lot of times when you have people in a relationship, they become the suspects immediately if there's some sort of misactions between them, if there was arguments, there were allegations, there were things of that nature. I think this might have been a little different because you had two people going through a divorce in two separate countries, and you'd have to wonder, like, what was the connection? Was there any need to go and try to intimidate the other person if you're so far apart? I think one of the things, and I don't know this for a fact, but actually, I'm sure they're trying to check out what his travel was like during this time period. Now, whether they do it by checking his phone, if they could get a search of the phone to see the location monitoring, which a lot of people forget, your cell phone tells everybody where you're at. So that could be very, very much against him if they have something that puts him in circumstantially the area where these things occurred.
This is a Law&Crime legal alert. Google Incognito tracked users' browsing data without their knowledge. Mass Tort Alliance, one of our legal sponsors, is helping users file for compensation due to Google misleading the privacy of their incognito browser. If you've used Google Incognito anytime since 2016, you can start your claim in less than 10 questions at incognitoclaims.com/LCnews. But there are still unanswered questions about the timeline between Ana's disappearance, David's alleged cooperation with investigators, and eventually his arrest. The husband retained an attorney, spoke with the press and I believe investigators and said, hey, I have nothing to do with this. He was back in his home country of Serbia. And now months later, he's arrested. So fill in the gaps there for me. What happened between, hey, I have nothing to do with this, and he's arrested in Miami?
Well, what you brought out was a good point. Was there was a lot of time. There were a few months in between when they were investigating, when they wanted to speak to him. He didn't want to speak, which he was exercising his rights. That should be no indication of guilt or innocence. It's just I'm going to protect my rights. Yet during that period of time between then and now, I am sure law enforcement in each country, and it appears from what I've seen that they're also working with the United States, has been investigating further. Sometimes they'll hope that a person will come in and admit and confess to what they did wrong, and therefore the investigation doesn't have to be as intricate as day by day and can move a lot more forward since you have guidance as to where all the evidence is. If no one's speaking, it's going to take some time for them to basically retrace everything that happened and see what kind of evidence would be a proof to prove someone's guilt.
Even though an arrest has been made, Mike says it's possible there's more investigative work ahead.
It's difficult to tell because also when it's a federal investigation, it's a lot different than the rules of evidence that go between each state individually. Like in New Jersey, when someone gets arrested, they get and they're charged, the evidence and discovery is turned over immediately. Federal courts and the federal system, it's not turned over immediately. It takes some time to see exactly what the feds have against you. So it's difficult to say where they're going with this, but this is where it becomes very important when you're an attorney representing a defendant that client has to be totally honest with you. You have the attorney-client privilege, and the government has the burden of proof, but your client has to let you know where there are parts where there is a weakness that could hurt him in the case.
If this does go to trial federally, let's say here in the United States, could we expect it to be a lengthy trial or even a long time between now and when it finally does go to trial?
I would think, based upon the fact that we're dealing with three different countries, the United States, Spain, and Serbia, this would be a long trial. It would be a long trial because number one is what people sometimes don't realize is there's probably going to be a lot of discovery, and if they're into the cell phones and have recordings and things of that nature, that are going to have all kinds of different languages that are going to need to be interpreted and things of that nature. So one sentence could turn into two or three, depending on how many times it has to be interpreted, and that just takes more and more time. I think a case like this may be a lot longer than if it was in this country because you have to deal with all the different law enforcement, not only in the United States, in Spain, in Serbia, wherever this occurred. So it's going to be a tough case just to organize.
So far, David has only been charged with Ana's disappearance and not her murder. I asked Mike if he thinks David is responsible. what is your armchair diagnosis of this? Do you think that he is a key suspect in the case? He could be the one responsible for Anna's disappearance?
It appears that if they had enough probable cause to arrest him, that he's the focus of it, and that where it's going to go is going to be interesting to see how they're putting this together. Because, as you said, it is a little interesting too, because there's been a delay where she was missing and nothing had occurred. So you've got to wonder is did they come across something, physical evidence of that nature, something like technological or something like that? Or did someone just come forward, a witness, and say, hey, listen, this is what I know, and this is what occurred, and this is what I saw? Those are the things we have to really know before we could predict where it's going.
And based on his arrest, can we unfortunately assume that Anna is no longer with us?
I don't know about that. I mean, that always becomes an interesting aspect of any criminal case where they're alleging a murder, yet they haven't recovered the body. And there's always that defense, although we've seen more and more it's not as successful, where people say, well, they haven't found anybody or they haven't found the body, so how do you prove someone's dead? So that takes a lot more legal research into it as to what exactly would need to be done and what timeframes need to be proven to show that you can make that allegation.
Whatever direction the case heads, Mike says the prosecuting country has their work cut out for them.
If the United States is handling the case, they've got to go interview witnesses in other countries. So, and just because you go see a witness doesn't necessarily guarantee that that witness is going to help you or cooperate or go forward with it. I mean, a subpoena will force them to, but it's going to take a lot of work. I think it's going to take a lot of time to do this investigation further.
After news of David's arrest, I reached out to his attorney for a comment, but haven't heard back. I also reached out to Anna's best friend, Sana, who we spoke with originally. She didn't want to speak on camera, but said, quote, "The only thing I can say right now is that I am happy that there has been an arrest, and we are hoping that this next chapter will bring justice and that we find answers about what happened to Anna." David is now being held in federal custody and is due back in court on May 10th for a pre-trial detention hearing. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.